The boy was suddenly shocked to see armed helicopters flying in one after another in the distant sky. Without hesitation, he immediately called the armed fighters to warn them. The Somali leader quickly ordered his men to prepare for battle. Little did they know that they were about to face the pride of the U.S. military, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Rangers, and the legendary Delta Force. No one expected that a mission led by such powerful forces would turn into a brutal fight for survival. The result was devastating. 19 American soldiers lost their lives, 73 were injured, and 1 was captured. The disaster was triggered by the downing of 2 Black Hawk helicopters, which is why this event became known as Black Hawk Down. This story is based on true events. It all began in 1991 on the Somali Peninsula, in East Africa. The Siad Barre regime collapsed, plunging the country into lawlessness. Countless armed factions emerged, and war loomed over the land. Civilians suffered immensely, streets were littered with corpses, and famine ravaged the country. The roots of Somalia's crisis were deeply complex, and even an entire book wouldn't be enough to explain them. In 1992, the United Nations intervened, deploying peacekeeping forces to restore order. Their first mission was to combat the widespread famine. Tons of food supplies were shipped in, but local warlords looted them before they could reach the starving civilians. The most powerful warlord, Mohammed Farah Aidid, mercilessly massacred innocent people to secure his dominance. He even killed 24 Pakistani peacekeepers, sparking global outrage. The unauthorized military action to bring him to justice at any cost, assigning the mission to U.S. General Garrison. On October 3, 1993, Garrison launched the operation. Delta Force was tasked with capturing ID. The Rangers secured the area, and Humvee convoys handled extraction. Confident in his strategy, Garrison believed the mission would be over in just 30 minutes. But underestimating the enemy would lead to one of the U.S. military's worst disasters since the Vietnam War. Before reaching their target, the Black Hawk helicopters were spotted. Militiamen armed with AK-47s quickly mobilized, setting tires on fire to block the streets. Flames engulfed the city, sending civilians fleeing in terror. In the helicopters, Delta Force operators felt the tension rise, cold sweat dripping down their faces.
Signals to the militia that we're coming!
2 minutes later, Delta Force hit the ground, storming the target building with expert precision. Close quarters combat was their specialty. Despite fierce resistance, they swiftly captured one of Aidid's key men. But the enemy numbers were overwhelming. Bullets rained down, blocking their escape route. The Rangers arrived for support, but before they could secure the area, an RPG missile struck. Disaster struck. A Ranger fell from the Black Hawk, crashing onto the ground with severe injuries. At that moment, the once simple capture mission spiraled into chaos. What was meant to be a swift operation turned into a nightmare. The U.S. troops couldn't distinguish militia from civilians, making every shot a moral dilemma.
Why aren't you shooting? We're not being shot at yet! How can you tell? A hiss means it's close. A snap means... Now they're shooting at us!
Their calls for reinforcements went unheard due to a communications failure. With no other option, they carried their wounded while under heavy fire. Meanwhile, the Humvee convoy was under relentless attack. A soldier was hit and died instantly before his comrades could save him. Even in the command center, Garrison watched in horror as his plan unraveled. And the worst was yet to come. A soldier took over a machine gun position and unleashed a barrage of bullets, forcing the militiamen into cover. But another RPG locked onto a Black Hawk, striking its tail rotor. The aircraft spun out of control, crashing to the ground like a wounded bird. Shaken but determined, Garrison ordered the Humvees to reach the crash site. But this decision proved fatal. Hundreds of enemy fighters were also converging on the wreckage. The US soldiers found themselves ambushed in the narrow streets. With casualties mounting, the vehicles were packed with wounded troops. But stopping meant certain death. The militia fighters, though untrained, overwhelmed the Americans with sheer numbers. Snipers hid in the shadows, firing deadly shots from unseen angles. In the chaos, one soldier accidentally took refuge inside a civilian home. A terrified woman and child stared at him. He signaled them to stay quiet before stepping outside, only to see a shadow moving in the distance. Fortune favored them. The gunfire erupted, but it was the enemy who fell. The civilians, trapped in misery, still couldn't escape their tragic fate. The battlefield was in complete chaos, and the unstable signals only made things worse for the US forces. The first Humvee convoy carrying the wounded finally made it back to base. Seeing their comrades covered in blood and the vehicles riddled with bullet holes, fear gripped everyone. But the war was far from over. Their downed brothers were still waiting to be rescued. A Little Bird helicopter located the crash site. There were 4 crew members aboard the wrecked Black Hawk II had already perished, and the remaining 2 were critically wounded. Just as they were about to evacuate the injured, armed militants suddenly launched an attack. Meanwhile, the Humvee convoy was racing toward the crash site. They had to find any way to bring back their comrades, dead or alive. Under relentless enemy fire, more soldiers were hit. One soldier watched in horror as his friend's severed arm landed at his feet. He picked it up and stuffed it into his backpack. The nightmares of war would haunt him for a lifetime. Despite being bombarded along the way, the Humvees pressed on. After securing the perimeter, 2 soldiers realized too late that the convoy had already left. Separated from their unit, they had no choice but to move on foot, only to be ambushed again. "I promise this guy won't make another mistake," one soldier reassured his comrade.
What I just tell you? I swear to God, you do that!
Okay? No. All right?
What?
No one expected it. Another Black Hawk, en route to the crash site, was struck by an RPG. The same horrific scene played out once again. The first rescue mission was still ongoing when the second disaster struck. The ground troops had no choice but to split up, one team heading for the first crash site, the other for the second. This legendary moment left a lasting impression on audiences. As a tribute to this battle, a new campaign mode in Delta Force was recently released. It perfectly recreates scenes from the film, with Unreal Engine 5, bringing even the smallest details like exposed rebar after explosions to life. One of the most intense sequences is the last stand at the Yellow Line, where players must survive endless waves of militia attacks. From snipers in high positions to extremists throwing grenades from cover, you and your squad must fight to the last bullet, holding out against impossible odds. As the second rescue team moved out, they immediately faced heavy fire. Forced to take cover inside a building, they knew they couldn't stay there forever. Comrades were still waiting. Meanwhile, at the second crash site, the militants had arrived in full force. The pilot's legs were shattered, and the 2 soldiers protecting him struggled to hold their ground.
Cody's gone, man. I'll be outside. Good luck.
One of them soon fell, his body looted by the enemy. The ruthless militia stripped him bare and paraded his corpse through the streets. This scene became an unforgettable scar in the US military's history. From the airfield, a soldier watched everything unfold through his binoculars. He took out a photo of his wife and daughter, staring at it for a brief moment before armed fighters stormed in. Militants had set up countless roadblocks in the streets, making it impossible for the Humvees to advance. Their comrades were just ahead, waiting for extraction, but they were trapped. The commander had no choice but to lead his men on foot. By now, General Garrison no longer cared about appearances. He contacted the Pakistani peacekeepers, requesting to evacuate the wounded to their base. The militants, however, had grown so bold that they set up artillery and launched a direct strike near the US base. The only ones left to defend it were the injured. Luckily, Delta Force operators arrived just in time. Braving the gunfire, they flanked the enemy from behind and silently eliminated the artillery crew. Seizing control of the cannon, they fired a devastating shot before the militants could react. But even this victory did little to change the tide of battle. It wasn't until 11:23 p.m. that the command center finally deployed 2 full infantry companies for rescue. Air support was now in place. Guided by infrared markers, they unleashed a relentless barrage upon the enemy stronghold. But the fight was far from over. Countless militia fighters lurked in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The US forces had no choice but to hold their ground and wait for Pakistani reinforcements. As dawn approached, the defenders were at their breaking point, low on ammo, wounded, and exhausted. The rescue team couldn't evacuate everyone at once. In a desperate move, the Rangers volunteered to run alongside the armored vehicles back to base.
We're running out of room around here.
Just gonna have to cram into every possible space.
Sir, respect, our Rangers can provide rear security. We'll walk you out of the hot zone, then we'll jump on the last few vehicles. Okay, let's get out of here.
At 5:45 a.m., after destroying sensitive equipment, they finally began their retreat. But exhaustion took its toll. Some soldiers fell behind, losing the protection of the armored convoy. Forced to fight their way through, they pushed forward on sheer willpower alone, running until they reached safety. When they finally arrived at the Pakistani base, it was over. The nightmare had ended. All that remained was a wasteland of corpses, shattered limbs, and ruined buildings. When war ends, all that's left is sorrow and silence.
You know, a friend of mine asked me before I got here, just when we were all shipping out, he asked me, why are you going to fight somebody else's war? What do y'all think, you're heroes? I didn't know what to say at the time, but looking down the sights. He asked me again, I'd say no. Your heart is warm. I'd say there's no way now. And the seams are torn. Yes, I'm a hero.
This mission saw 160 elite US troops deployed, along with 12 Humvees and 19 helicopters. The final toll: 19 dead, 73 wounded, 1 captured. 2 Black Hawks were shot down, a third severely damaged. Over 1,000 militants were killed, but it was the most devastating US military failure since Vietnam. When fallen soldiers become the punctuation marks behind the word peace, when a Somali child is struck down by Black Hawk's bullets, and when shell casings soaked in blood hit the ground, only then do people realize that the cost of war is always paid with the lives of the powerless. Step into the real world of war through film. I'm Uncle Tang. See you next time.